My mother raised her glass to disinherit me in favor of my sister, Bella. I didn't cry or beg. Instead, I calmly asked my father if he knew about her affair with his best friend. That one question didn't just ruin Thanksgiving, it destroyed her entire life. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The scent of roasted sage and caramelized onions should have been comforting. It was Thanksgiving, after all, a time for gratitude, for family, for warmth against the encroaching November chill. But as I stood in the foyer of my parents' sprawling estate, shaking the rain off my coat, the only thing I felt was a deep, resonating exhaustion that settled into the very marrow of my bones. I had been battling a severe flu for the last 2 weeks, the kind that leaves you feeling hollowed out and brittle. My skin was pale, clammy against the high collar of my dress, and my head throbbed with a dull, persistent rhythm that matched the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I shouldn't have come. Any sane person would have stayed in bed with a thermos of tea and a movie. But Sylvia didn't tolerate absence. "Catherine, is that you lurking in the doorway?" My mother's voice drifted from the drawing room, sharp and manicured, devoid of any real maternal warmth. It was a voice that commanded attention, a voice that had dictated the terms of my existence for 32 years. "I'm here, Mother," I called out, my voice raspier than I would have liked. I walked into the light. Sylvia was standing by the fireplace, a crystal flute of champagne dangling precariously from her fingers. She looked impeccable, as always. Her silver hair was coiffed into a helmet of perfection, her silk blouse shimmered in the firelight, and her face was set in that perpetual expression of mild disdain she reserved exclusively for me. Sitting on the velvet loveseat was Bella. My younger sister looked like a porcelain doll that had been brought to life and given a trust fund. She was 29 going on 16, scrolling through her phone with a bored expression, dressed in an outfit that probably cost more than my car. "You look terrible," Sylvia said, not as a concern, but as an observation of a flaw in her decor. "I hope you aren't contagious. Bella has a gala next week. She can't afford to be sick." "I'm fine," I lied, suppressing a cough that rattled in my chest. "Just tired. It's been a long quarter at the firm." "Work, work, work," Bella sighed, not looking up from her screen. "Don't you ever get bored of staring at spreadsheets, Catherine? It sounds absolutely soul-crushing." "Forensic accounting isn't just spreadsheets, Bella," I said, moving toward the dining room as my father, Robert, entered from the kitchen. "It's about finding the truth hidden in the numbers." "Catherine," my father's face lit up, the only genuine smile in the room. He looked older this year, the lines around his eyes deeper, his shoulders stooped under the weight of the business empire he had built from scratch. He crossed the room and wrapped me in a bear hug that smelled of cedar and Old Spice. "I didn't think you'd make it, sweetheart. You feel warm. Are you feverish?" "I'm okay, Dad," I whispered, leaning into him for a second longer than necessary. He was the anchor, the only reason I subjected myself to Sylvia's psychological warfare. "Just happy to see you." "Well, let's get some food in you," he said, guiding me toward the dining table which was set with enough silverware to arm a small militia. Sylvia went all out this year. We sat. The tension in the room was palpable, a physical weight pressing down on the damask tablecloth. Sylvia sat at the head, naturally. Robert was opposite her. Bella and I faced each other across the centerpiece of autumn flowers. The first course was served in silence, broken only by the scrape of silver against fine china. I focused on eating, trying to regain some strength, but my stomach churned. I could feel Sylvia's eyes on me, dissecting my movements, judging my posture. I knew something was coming. The air felt charged, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. Sylvia didn't wait for dessert. She didn't even wait for the main course to be fully cleared. She tapped her spoon against her glass. Clink, clink, clink. "Robert, girls," she began, her voice taking on a theatrical quality. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "I have an announcement to make. something that I have been discussing with our estate planners for quite some time, and I feel that tonight, surrounded by family, is the perfect time to share it. My father looked up, blinking. Now, Sylvia, can't we just enjoy the turkey? Hush, Robert, this is important. She turned her gaze to Bella, her eyes softening into a look of adoration that I had never, not once in my life, received. As you know, the future of this family is paramount. We need to ensure that the legacy Robert built is maintained by someone who understands the social grace and the image required to keep our standing in this community. I put my fork down. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, not from the flu, but from a sudden, cold realization. Sylvia turned to me, her expression hardening into ice. Catherine, you have your little job, you are independent, you've always been, self-sufficient, rougher around the edges. She turned back to Bella. But Bella is the jewel of this family, and that is why, effective immediately, we are restructuring the family trust. She raised her glass high. To our golden girl, Bella, Sylvia announced, her voice ringing with triumph. The sole heir to the estate, the business holdings, and the liquid assets, to the one who will inherit everything someday. Bella smirked. It wasn't a smile of gratitude, it was a smile of victory. She looked at me, her eyebrows raised in mock sympathy, waiting for me to shatter. To Bella, Sylvia repeated, looking at Robert expectantly. My father looked stunned. Sylvia, we discussed a split, we talked about. I made an executive decision, Robert, she snapped, her mask slipping for a fraction of a second. It's done. The papers are already drawn up. I sat there, frozen. It wasn't about the money. I made good money. It was the erasure. It was the final, public confirmation that in my mother's eyes I was nothing. I was a mistake to be tolerated, while Bella was the prize. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. I looked at my father, who was pale and stammering, clearly steamrolled by Sylvia's machinations. I looked at Bella, who was practically glowing with greed. And then, something inside me snapped. The exhaustion, the years of bullying, the constant need to prove myself, it all crystallized into a cold, hard diamond of anger. I didn't scream, I didn't flip the table. I just smiled. It was a terrifyingly calm smile. I picked up my fork, speared a piece of turkey, and chewed slowly, letting the silence stretch out until it was unbearable. I swallowed. I took a sip of water. Then I looked Sylvia dead in the eye. That's wonderful, Mom, I said, my voice steady and clear. It's good to know where we stand, but I wonder, would Dad still be toasting Bella if he knew about James, specifically the James from 10 years ago? The reaction was instantaneous and absolute. The table went dead silent. It wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum, as if the air itself had been sucked out of the room. The color drained from Sylvia's face so fast it was frightening. One moment she was flushed with the triumph of her announcement, and the next, she was as gray as the ash in the fireplace. Her mouth opened, then closed, resembling a fish pulled from water. The crystal flute in her hand trembled violently, champagne sloshing over the rim and dripping onto her pristine tablecloth. Bella's smirk vanished. She looked from me to Mom, confusion knitting her perfectly shaped brows. "Who is James?" she asked, her voice shrill in the quiet room. I didn't answer her. I kept my eyes locked on Sylvia. My father, poor Robert, looked utterly bewildered. He frowned, his knife hovering over his plate. "James," he repeated, the name rolling off his tongue with a familiarity that made my heart ache for him. "You mean, my James Miller, my old partner?" "The very same," I said softly, leaning back in my chair. I crossed my arms, assuming the posture I used during depositions. "The one who vanished from our lives 10 years ago. The one you were told embezzled money from the startup fund and fled the country." "Catherine, stop this instant," Sylvia shrieked. Her voice was unrecognizable, a jagged, panicked sound. "You are delirious, you have a fever. Robert, she's hallucinating. We need to call a doctor." "I'm perfectly lucid, Mother," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly serious. I'm not the one who needs to be worried about my health right now. Robert looked at Sylvia, then back at me. The confusion in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a dawn of horror. Catherine, what are you saying? James didn't just leave, he betrayed us. He stole from the company. Did he? I asked. Or was he paid to leave? Was he paid to disappear because he threatened to blow up Sylvia's perfect little world? That is enough. Sylvia slammed her hand on the table. The silverware jumped. Get out! Get out of my house, you ungrateful, lying little. I have the bank records, Sylvia. I cut her off. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. The statement hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I'm a forensic accountant. Did you really think you could hide a paper trail from me? Did you think I wouldn't notice structured withdrawals from the chaotic shell companies you set up in '09? Sylvia froze. The anger in her eyes was replaced by pure, unadulterated fear. She knew what I did for a living. She knew I was the best at it. And she realized, in that split second, that she had underestimated me for the last time. But they had forgotten one crucial thing, I thought to myself, watching her crumble. They forgot that while they were busy building a facade, I was busy learning how to tear down walls, brick by financial brick. Bella looked between us, sensing the shift in power, but unable to comprehend the magnitude of it. Mom, what is she talking about? What bank records? Robert stood up slowly. He was a large man, but he looked shrunken. Sylvia, he said, his voice trembling, why is she talking about James? That was the hardest year of my life, losing my best friend, losing the business partner I trusted. She's lying, Robert. She's jealous, Sylvia cried out, moving around the table to grab his arm. She's jealous because of the inheritance. She wants to ruin this night because she can't stand that Bella is the favorite. I don't care about the money, Dad, I said, turning my gaze to him. I never have, you know that. I care about you. And I couldn't sit here and watch you sign over your life's work to the woman who made a fool of you. A fool, Robert whispered. I have the emails, too, I added, twisting the knife. The ones from the private server you thought was wiped. The ones where you and James discussed how to frame the embezzlement so Dad wouldn't look for him. The ones where you discussed the timeline. The room spun. I could see the dots connecting in Robert's mind. The timeline, 10 years ago. 10 years ago, Sylvia had almost left Robert. 10 years ago, the family was in turmoil. 10 years ago. Robert looked at Sylvia. He looked at her not with love, but with the terrifying clarity of a man seeing a stranger for the first time. He pulled his arm away from her grasp. Sit down, Sylvia, Robert commanded. It was a voice I had never heard him use with her. It was the voice of the CEO, the man who crushed competitors. Robert, please. I said sit down. Sylvia sank into her chair, weeping into her hands. It was a performance, of course. Sylvia didn't feel remorse, she felt caught. I need air, I said, standing up. My legs felt shaky, the adrenaline beginning to crash into my illness. I'm going to the guest house. I'll bring the file in the morning, Dad. You can read it yourself. I walked out of the dining room, leaving the wreckage of Thanksgiving dinner behind me. The silence that followed me out was heavier than the one that had started it. It was the silence of a life shattering. To understand why I detonated a nuclear bomb at the dinner table, you have to understand the decade of silence that preceded it. You have to understand that I didn't just stumble upon this information. I hunted for it. I have always been the fixer in this family, even though I was treated like the outcast. When Bella crashed her car in college, I was the one who dealt with the insurance and the police report so Dad wouldn't find out. When Sylvia overspent on the renovations for the summer house, I was the one who balanced the books and moved funds around so the accountants wouldn't flag it as suspicious. I was useful. That was my currency. If I was useful, they had to keep me around. If I was useful, maybe, just maybe, Sylvia would love me. But love isn't a ledger. You can't balance the books on affection. The investigation into James started 6 months ago. Dad had asked me to take a look at some old trust documents, preparing for this very estate planning session. He wanted to make sure everything was clean for his retirement. I dove into the archives. I love the archives. Numbers don't lie, people lie, numbers just wait to be found. I found a recurring payment to a consulting firm in the Cayman Islands, JM Holdings. It started 10 years ago, exactly 1 month after James Miller, Dad's best friend and business partner, was allegedly caught embezzling and fled the country. The story had always been that James stole $500,000 and ran. Dad was heartbroken. He refused to press charges because of their history, but he cut James out of his life completely. He never spoke his name again. But the numbers didn't make sense. Why was Dad's personal estate paying JM Holdings $5,000 a month for consulting services that didn't exist? I dug deeper. I traced the IP addresses of the authorization signatures. They didn't come from Dad's office. They came from Sylvia's iPad. Sylvia. My mother is a woman of terrifying aesthetic standards. She believes in a world where everything is beautiful and anything ugly is swept under a rug. She grew up with money, married more money, and has never worked a day in her life. Her profession, if you can call it that, is socialite. She chairs committees. She hosts galas. She judges people. But behind the pearls and the charity loo, Enchins, Sylvia is a shark. 10 years ago, Sylvia was bored. Dad was working 80-hour weeks building the company. James was around. James was charming, less driven, more attentive. It was a cliché. The neglected wife and the best friend. As I pieced together the digital footprint, the picture became nauseatingly clear. They had an affair. A passionate, reckless affair that lasted 6 months. Then James got greedy. Or maybe he wanted to come clean. I found draft emails in an old cloud account. Sylvia had synced to the family server years ago. She's tech illiterate, which was her downfall. James to Sylvia. I can't do this anymore, Syl. Robert is a good man. I'm going to tell him. Sylvia to James. You will do no such thing. You will ruin everything. If you tell him, I will destroy you. I will make sure you never work in this industry again. And she did. She didn't just break up with him. She orchestrated his exile. She framed him for embezzlement. She moved the money herself. I found the transfer logs and pinned it on him. Then she offered him a deal. Take the fall, leave the country, and I will pay you a monthly stipend to keep your mouth shut. Or stay, fight it, and I will ensure Robert uses his lawyers to put you in prison for a crime I committed. James, the coward, took the deal. Sylvia had been paying him off with Dad's own money for a decade. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was why she was so desperate to disinherit me now. In the last few months of my investigation, I noticed the payments to James had stopped. I found an obituary. James died in a motorcycle accident in Thailand 4 months ago. The hush money was no longer needed. The threat was gone. With James dead, Sylvia felt safe. She felt invincible. She thought the secrets were buried with him, so she decided to finally clean house. She decided to secure the assets for Bella, the daughter she actually liked, the daughter who was just like her, vain, shallow, and malleable. She wanted to cut me out because I was the only one smart enough to figure it out. She wanted to push me away, alienate me, make me leave so I would never have access to the books again. She thought she was tying up loose ends. She introduced the antagonist of her own story the moment she underestimated me. She saw me as a quiet, mousy accountant. She didn't realize that in my line of work, we are the hunters. We are the ones who bring down giants with a single spreadsheet. At the dinner table, when she raised that glass, she wasn't just insulting me. She was trying to erase me. And I decided that if I was going to be erased, I was going to leave a scar that would never fade. I sat in the guest house, my laptop open, the blue light illuminating the dark room. I could see the main house from the window. The lights were blazing in the dining room. I saw shadows moving frantically. I had the dossier ready. PDF files, bank statements, screenshots of texts, the IP logs. It was a masterpiece of evidence. I wasn't just going to tell Dad. I was going to show him. I was going to show him that the love of his life was a parasite who had fed on his trust and his fortune. My phone buzzed. Bella, you are a psycho. Mom is hyperventilating. Dad is locked in his study. You better fix this, Catherine, now. I typed back 2 words. Catherine, read it. I hit send on the email to my father. Subject line, the truth about James. The war had begun, and unlike Sylvia, I didn't care about collateral damage. I only cared about the truth. The guest house was cold, or maybe it was just the fever finally settling into my bones. I wrapped myself in a thick wool blanket and sat at the small mahogany desk, the glow of my laptop screen the only light in the room. Outside, the rain had turned into a sleet storm, pecking against the glass like 1,000 tiny birds demanding entry. I watched the main house through the window. It was a fortress of stone and light, a place where I had grown up but never truly lived. I saw the silhouette of my father in his study, pacing, back and forth, the rhythm of a man whose world was dissolving. I turned back to my screen. The email I had sent, the truth about James, was open in my sent folder. It wasn't just a letter, it was a forensic dossier. I had treated my own family like a hostile corporate takeover target. I opened the attachment, reviewing the evidence one last time to steel my nerves. Exhibit A, the scanned check from 10 years ago, the one Sylvia claimed James had forged, but I had zoomed in on the signature line. Using digital layering software, I had analyzed the pen pressure. It matched Sylvia's handwriting perfectly, not James's. She had signed it. She had authorized the initial theft herself. Exhibit B, the email thread from the private server. I read the text again, my stomach churning. Date, November 14th, 2013 from SM Sylvia to J. Miller subject. The exit strategy Robert is asking Q. Questions about the withdrawals. We can't hide it anymore. You need to leave, James, tonight. I've transferred the severance to the Cayman account. If you stay, I will tell him you forced me. I will tell him you threatened Bella. Who do you think he will believe? The wife he adores or the partner who stole from him? Go. She threatened to use Bella, I whispered to the empty room. That was the line that had made me physically ill when I found it. She was willing to weaponize her own daughter's safety to cover her infidelity. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Bella. Bella, Dad is throwing things. Mom locked herself in the master bath. What did you send him? Catherine, please answer me. I'm scared. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Bella was collateral damage, yes, but she was also complicit in her own ignorance. She had enjoyed the fruits of Sylvia's manipulation for years without ever questioning why the sun always shone on her and the rain fell on me. She needed to sit in the dark for a while. A heavy knock on the guest house door made me jump. I froze. Was it Sylvia? Had she come to scream? To hit me? It wouldn't be the first time she'd lost her composure when cornered. Catherine. It was Robert. His voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. I walked to the door and unlocked it. My father stood there, soaked to the bone. He wasn't wearing a coat. His tuxedo shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his tie gone. Rainwater dripped from his gray hair onto his face, mixing with what I realized were tears. He held a tablet in his hand. Dad, I said softly, stepping back to let him in. He walked in, bringing the smell of cold rain and ozone with him. He didn't look at me at first. He looked at the tablet, his thumb scrolling frantically through the PDF I had sent. Is this real? He asked. His voice was a jagged whisper. Catherine, look me in the eye. Is this real? I verified the IP addresses myself, Dad, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling of my hands. I cross-referenced the bank routing numbers with Sylvia's personal travel logs. Every time a large transfer was made to the offshore account, she was in a location with the corresponding secure server access. The metadata on the emails is authentic. It hasn't been tampered with. He collapsed into the armchair near the desk, the tablet slipping from his fingers onto his lap. He put his head in his hands. 10 years, he moaned. I hated him for 10 years. I cursed his name. I didn't go to his mother's funeral because I was so angry. I thought he stole from us. I thought he betrayed me. He did betray you, Dad, I said gently, sitting on the edge of the bed. He slept with your wife, but he didn't steal the money. She gave it to him to make him go away. Why? Robert looked up, his eyes red and rimmed with exhaustion. Why not just leave me? Why destroy his reputation? Why destroy our friendship? Because Sylvia doesn't lose, I said. Divorce would have been messy. It would have damaged her social standing. Being the victim of a thief garnered her sympathy. It made you circle the wagons around her. It made you protect her. He was silent for a long time. The only sound was the rain and the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchenette. And tonight, he said, his voice hardening, toasting Bella, disinheriting you. She knew I was looking, I explained. I asked for access to the archives 6 months ago. She must have seen the server logs. She knew I was getting close. She wanted to cut me out before I could put the pieces together. If I was disinherited, I'd have no legal standing to audit the family trust. Robert stood up. The grief in his eyes was being replaced by a cold, terrifying resolve. He walked over to the window and looked at the main house. She's in the bedroom, he said. She told me you forged it all. She said you were sick in the head. She said she was going to have you committed. I expected that, I said. She underestimated you, Robert said. He turned to me. And so did I. He walked to the door. Lock this behind me. Don't let anyone in, not even Bella. We finish this in the morning. I didn't sleep. The fever spiked around 3:00 a.m., bringing with it vivid, feverish dreams of numbers floating in the air, transforming into chains that wrapped around the house. When the sun rose, it was a dull, gray dawn that offered no warmth. I dressed in a sharp black suit, my armor. I swallowed 3 ibuprofen and drank a glass of stale water. Then, I marched to the main house. The kitchen was silent. The housekeeper had been given the day off, clearly. The remnants of the Thanksgiving feast were still on the dining table, the turkey carcass picked clean, the wine stains dried on the tablecloth like old blood. I found them in the sunroom. Sylvia was sitting on the floral sofa, wearing a silk dressing gown, clutching a cup of coffee with both hands. She looked haggard, her makeup from the night before smeared under her eyes. Bella was sitting next to her, looking terrified, her knees pulled up to her chest. Robert stood by the window, his back to them. He was dressed in a fresh suit, shaved, and looked like a man preparing for a funeral. You have some nerve showing your face, Sylvia spat as soon as I entered. Her voice was scratchy, venomous. After the lies you spread last night, you are sick, Catherine. You need help. Good morning to you too, Mother, I said, placing my laptop on the coffee table. I didn't sit. I stood over them. I see you've been spinning your narrative. She told us, Bella piped up, her voice wavering. She told us that James was blackmailing her. She said he made up the affair to extort money, and she paid him to protect Dad's reputation. She was a victim, Catherine, and you're trying to turn it into something dirty. I looked at Bella. It was pathetic, really. She was clinging to the only version of reality where her world didn't implode. Is that the story? I asked, looking at Sylvia. Blackmail. It's the truth, Sylvia said, lifting her chin. He was a monster. He threatened to ruin Robert's company with false allegations of fraud if I didn't pay him. I suffered in silence for 10 years to protect this family. And you dare to twist my sacrifice. Robert turned around. His face was stone. I checked the phone records, Sylvia. Sylvia froze. What? Catherine's report included the dates of the alleged blackmail texts, Robert said, his voice devoid of emotion. I called the provider. I had them pull the archive transcripts from your old number, the one you thought was deleted. He walked over to the coffee table and tossed a stack of printed papers onto it. They fanned out, covering my laptop. These aren't threats, Sylvia, Robert said. These are love letters. Bella reached out, her hand trembling, and picked up a sheet. Sylvia text, I can't wait to see you at the hotel tonight. Robert is boring me to death with his talk of mergers. I need a real man. James text, I feel guilty, Sil. He's my best friend. Sylvia text, forget him. Just think about us. Think about the life we can have with his money once we figure out how to get it. Bella dropped the paper as if it had burned her. She looked at her mother, her mouth agape. The fence had crumbled. I did it to keep our family together. No, I said, stepping in. You did it for the money, and speaking of the money. I looked at Bella. You might want to sit down for this part, golden girl. Because the inheritance Mom toasted to last night, I pulled up a spreadsheet on my laptop and turned the screen so they could all see. A line graph plummeted downwards in a jagged red streak. The hush money didn't come from Dad's checking account, I explained. That would have been too easy to spot. It came from the family trust. The one meant for our future. The one meant for B. La. I pointed to the numbers. $5,000 a month for 10 years is $600,000, but that's just... You saved me. If I had signed those papers, if I had retired and left her in control, he shuddered. But it's not over, I said, closing my laptop. She still has her name on the deeds. She still has the credit cards. We need to secure the asset. I was in my work suit, Dad in his business casual office attire. We looked like crashers. We found Sylvia in the center of the ballroom. She looked magnificent. I had to give her that. She was wearing a crimson gown that looked like it was made of liquid rubies, holding a glass of champagne, surrounded by a circle of concerned friends, the wives of Dad's business rivals. I slowed my pace, straining to hear her voice over the string quartet. It's simply tragic, Sylvia was saying, her voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. Robert has deteriorated so quickly. The dementia is aggressive. He's become paranoid, accusing me of terrible things. He's even turned poor Catherine against me. You know how susceptible she is, always the jealous one. Have some class for once in your life. Class, Robert stepped into the light. You want to talk about class, Sylvia? How about the class it takes to steal from a charity? The whispers in the room stopped instantly. The string quartet even trailed off, sensing the shift in the room's energy. I don't know what you're talking about, Sylvia laughed nervously, looking around for support. He's having an episode. Someone call security. No, called SV Design. $50,000 in the last 6 months alone. It matches the exact amount you paid to the divorce lawyer you secretly retained in August, just in case James's death exposed you. The crowd gasped. These were people who had donated millions to this foundation. Is gone. Let's go home, Catherine, he said. Yeah, I replied, closing the folder. Let's go. 6 months later. The summer sun was streaming through the windows of the new office, Vance and Associates. It wasn't the massive glass tower, my friends. You were right. He's expensing his family vacations as client development. Good catch, I said, smiling at her. You're getting better at spotting the patterns. It's not hard when you know what liars look like, Bella said, a shadow crossing her face. Bella had taken the hardest hit. Her entire worldview had been constructed by Sylvia, a house of cards built on the idea that she was... But to her credit, she hadn't stayed down. She had come to me a week after the gala, asking for a job, not a handout, a job. I started her in data entry. She hated it. She complained hours. Robert nodded, staring at his glass. I went to see her, you know. The table went quiet. Sylvia, I asked. Yes, yesterday I wanted to see if, I don't know, if she had any regret. And, Bella asked, her voice tight. She asked me if I liked her new haircut, Robert said, shaking his head with a sad smile. Then she asked if I could increase her allowance because the condo association fees are criminal. She hasn't changed. She can't change. I'm sorry, Dad, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. Don't be, Robert said, looking at me with intense clarity. I lost a wife, yes, and it hurts, but look what I found. He looked at Bella, then he rested his gaze on me. I spent my whole life building a legacy, he said softly. I thought the legacy was the money. I thought it was the company, the buildings, the name on the trust. He took a sip of water. But at that Thanksgiving dinner, when you stood up, Catherine, when you spoke the truth even though your voice was shaking, I realized I had been looking at the wrong ledger. He raised his glass. It wasn't champagne. It was just water. But it felt more significant than any toast Sylvia had ever made. To Catherine, my father said, his eyes shining. Not the golden girl, but the iron woman, the one who saved us. Bella raised her glass. To the iron woman, she said, and for the first time in 30 years her smile reached her eyes. And, thank you for not giving up on me. I raised my glass, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the summer sun. I had spent my life analyzing losses, calculating deficits, and hunting for missing value. But as I looked at my father and my sister, finally free of the web of lies, I realized the books were finally balanced.